So the modality principle means that the user should use on-screen audio rather than on-screen text when presenting a multimedia presentation that uses graphics, illustrations, animations, or other visuals. Since our brain is broken up into two cognitive channels, auditory and visual, using audio alongside a graphic can help free up brain capacity. So here we're going to look at two figures that are taken both from Chapter 6, which highlight how our memory systems process and obtain multimedia content. So take a look at this first one. If both printed words and pictures require our eyes to visually process, then there's going to be a cognitive visual overload. Now let's take a look at this one. If you can see here, if we're able to see the picture with our eyes while simultaneously listening to the audio with our ears, there is a good balance between our phonetic and our visual processing channels. So when we are creating multimedia presentations, we must keep our memory systems and their capacities in our mind.
So how to better present information? Multimedia learning must consider both the information presented and the cognitive process of the learner. For some people who often use auditory learning, oral explanation will be more benefit than reading on test screen with their eyes.
The redundancy principle is very similar to the modality principle, which suggests that learners learn better with audio and animation. Incorporating audio, visual, and on-screen text is redundant and can hurt the learner. So let's take a look at this example that was also presented to us in the text. If you can see on the left-hand side, the presenter is saying bears enjoy eating honey, as well as bears enjoy eating honey is presented on screen using text alongside the picture. That becomes a lot for the viewer to process all at once. So take a look at the right-hand side. The picture coincides with what the speaker is orally presenting, and there is no need to read the text on screen as well. So let's take a look at an example. First, we will look at using the modality principle. So we'll look at the life cycle of a butterfly. First, butterflies begin their life as an egg. They then turn into a caterpillar, which eventually becomes a chrysalis, and finally they emerge as an adult butterfly. Now let's take a look at the same exact example, but this time we're going to have audio narration, on-screen text, and the visuals. The life cycle of a butterfly. First, butterflies begin their life as an egg. Then they turn into a caterpillar, which eventually becomes a chrysalis, and finally they emerge as an adult butterfly. So as you can see with these two examples, the first example without words allows the viewer and the listener to process the stages by viewing the pictures, but also processing the words using their ears and their listening. Providing the words on the screen also is redundant to the learner, and it's not really going to help them. Now we're going to take a look at some acceptable on-screen text scenarios. So let's think back to that butterfly example that was just presented. Including the entire narration as the text was redundant information. But what if the stages of each cycle were just included? Well, there are certain situations where it is okay to include on-screen text, narration, and a visual, but they are specific cases. If the words are technical, unfamiliar, lengthy, or needed again for future reference, then it is okay to include them on the screen. So for example, including the word chrysalis alongside the picture of the chrysalis will be helpful for the learners because it will most likely be an unfamiliar word to them where they might need to use again for future reference. Another situation where it is acceptable to use on-screen text would be describing a mathematical formula that is explained, but it's also complex for the learner to obtain through just audio alone. So here's an example of Pythagorean theorem and the distance formula, where it shows how the distance formula is equal to the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. So it also explains that the distance is between those two plotted points, and it shows the formula, as well as showing the visual picture of what they're actually taking the distance from point A to point B. You could also include on-screen text when there are keywords that are helping to identify the steps in a procedure or a shortened version of the actual narration. So we're going to take a quick look at a YouTube video that I found that kind of goes through the steps on how to decorate a gingerbread house. So as you're watching, you'll notice that not every single word is explicitly on the screen that she's saying, but there are bits and pieces that are added to emphasize each step and to allow the learner to remember what each part of the procedure is.
Just sprinkle it down. Look at that, it looks just like snow. Tip 2, decorate all 4 sides of your gingerbread house before assembling. The reason I like to do this is because once your gingerbread house is assembled, it's very difficult to decorate at a vertical angle. It's much easier to decorate horizontal when it's nice and flat. It's just so much more natural. Tip 3, you can roll out your gummies. You can get creative with your candy. This kit comes with 2 gummies. There's these little mint leaves and these little gumdrops. Over here, I've rolled them out so you can see what they look like. I use these gummies to create the stained glass look and the wreath on.
Finally, the last scenario that is acceptable to include on-screen text along with narration would be directions to a practice or an exercise. For example, if you're showing students the directions when there is a fire drill, you might want to include the important keywords that you want to highlight during that situation. So when you're practicing the fire drill, you know that the students are going to stop, line up in specific order. They're going to silently walk in the hallway and walk outside and listen for further instructions. So highlighting these keywords with the visuals will help them to remember when they are practicing. So what happens if there is no graphic? Basically, if there's no graphic, there's no picture, illustration, etc., then it is okay to use on-screen text, as our eyes are not having to look at words and a picture. Learners tend to learn better with narration and on-screen text when there is no graphic. So there is not an overload between any of our cognitive channels. Overall, when presenting multimedia presentations, we should avoid redundancy because it can hurt learning. Using 2 multimedia strategies is better than using all 3 simultaneously.